4 verse 1 to 11. 오늘 말씀은 갈라디아서 4장 1절에서 11절까지 말씀입니다. 갈라디아서 4장 1절에서 11절까지 말씀입니다. Galatians chapter 4 verse 1 to 11. You can either read in English or Korean, whatever you prefer. 한국어로 읽으셔도 되고 영어로 읽으셔도 되겠습니다. Let's read all together in one voice, okay? 같이 읽겠습니다. 시작. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is but he is under guardians and managers until the day set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were the law, so that we might receive the adoptions as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into our heart, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principle of the world? Those slaves you want to be once more. You observe days and months and seasons and years. I'm afraid I may have a labor over you in vain. Amen. This is the word of God. How many of you are still underage? Raise your hand if you're still underage. It's okay. It's nothing to be embarrassed. Underage, okay. I mean, you might understand, but being underage isn't fun at all. It's not fun, right? Let's be honest. Why is that? Because there's no freedom. You have no freedom when you're underage. Think about it, both at home and both at school, right? I'm sure a lot of you have some kind of house rule or something, right? Like what time you have to stop looking at your phone and start doing the homework. What time is the meal and what time you're supposed to go to bed, and also how many of you actually have a curfew? Curfew that you're supposed to turn off your phone. No one? Okay, I'm really surprised. Also at school, there's no freedom, right? What would happen if you start skipping class? It's gonna happen, right? I hope nobody experienced that. When you actually skip class, a lot of things happen. You get a detention, you got a suspension, you got an in-house suspension, Saturday school. I'm not gonna tell you why I know all this, but you get all this kind of punishment from like a school, right? So there's no freedom when you're underage. But the question is, let me ask you this. What if a complete freedom is given to you? You have a total, complete freedom, even if you're underage. How are you going to use that freedom if you really have that freedom, right? You can think about it. You can use your phone whenever you want to, both at home and school. Nobody's going to tell you anything, right? It's totally up to you. Whether you go to class, not going to class, it's totally up to you. You have a choice. You have a freedom. Think about it. Before coming to the States, I came to the States when I was 12, right? When I was in 7th grade. Before coming to the States, there was a brief period where I lived with my brother, without my parents. And my dad was already in the States studying and preparing all the dorm and everything ready so that me and my brother can come over and also start school right away. And then during that brief time, that 1 year, I enjoyed a total freedom. You know why? Because there's nobody who can tell me nothing. Nobody. Think about it. Back then, we didn't have a smartphone, but I enjoy the freedom of watching TV all day. Right after school, I just start watching TV until I go to bed. And there's nobody who can tell me to turn off the TV. I really enjoy the time, And there's no curfew. And there's no time where I need to start the homework and those kind of stuff, right? And during that time, what happened was that I started to hang out with these two guys at school. Those two guys were really known as really funny and really amazing personality. And they were the really popular guys. I started to hang out with those two kids. Think about it. I was 7th grade. And then they seemed like really good kids. I mean, they were really nice to me at first. And then they also even asked me whether I want to do the part-time job with them. And then back then we used to have a newspaper, real newspaper. So we had to wake up 4 a.m. and then deliver the newspaper. So pay wasn't that good. Still, you get the money, right? So I really gladly took that offer. And I started delivering the newspaper with them. But then a few months later, I started to notice their true color. And I noticed one time I saw them stealing very expensive stuff at school. Like opening people's locker and then just grabbing them and then act like they didn't do anything. They were really good at lying, And then after that, I also saw them not only smoking, but also doing a drug. There was a little different drug at the time in Korea. And then at first, they didn't really ask me to do it. But then later, they were trying to be nice to me. And it's like, you want to try this, You want to try stealing the stuff? It's so you can make a lot of good money out of it. And I said no. But at the same time, what I really had in my mind was that I was a little afraid that I might lose them. I might stop hanging out with them. I kind of wanted to please those kids, right? And then later, when I came to Korea, United States, I heard from my friends that one of them actually got into the juvenile prison when they were a 9th grader in high school. Looking back, I realized that having total freedom at underage without parental supervision is a very dangerous thing. Now I know it, because I get exposed to sin and all kind of temptation all the time, right? Looking at the Israel story, when Israelites got out of Egypt after Exodus, by the time they settled down in Canaan, they were like you. They were like underage kids. And they needed God's guidance and supervision. And there's a reason behind it. Because we have to understand the history. Before they got out of Egypt, they lived in Egypt how many years? 430 years. And during that time, you know what happened? The place was filled with idols. And when they were being slaves in Egypt, they didn't know God. They heard about God, but they never had a relationship with God. So while they were being a slave, what they did was they were worshiping idols. They were worshiping the same idol the Egyptians were worshiping. Then Moses showed up one day, and we are out of this place. We are leaving. And he took them out of Egypt, and then after 40 years of wilderness, they finally settled down in Canaan, right? But now they have to start living in this land where there is holy God. They used to live away from God. Now they live close proximity to God. Think about it, living in the same place with holy God. Holy God is living among you, right? And there was a problem. There was a problem. The problem was that their lifestyle was already accustomed to idolatry and sin over 430 years. Also in Canaan, there were a lot of different tribes that were worshiping different idols. Think about it. They ran away from the idol, but settled down in a new place, but there were people who were worshiping different idols, right? So if total freedom was given to them, can you think what's going to happen? I'm sure they would have turned to those old idols they used to worship, going back to the same idol. So what God did was that in order to protect his people, in order to protect them, God gave them the law through Moses. That's the purpose of giving law to his people. The 10 commandments. So God was saying, if you abide by this law, you won't fall back into idolatry. Try to observe and keep all these law, 10 commandments as much as possible because it will protect you. It will protect you. And you will always be able to worship me if you are able to keeping these laws. You know what happens after that? Brief time when they used to obey them, but after a few years, they turn back to idols right away. Over and over and over again. So what God did was that, God had to punish them, bring judgment on them, right? Even when they came back from the Babylonian captivity, you know what they did? They straight went back to idolatry and sin. So that's the core message, the message the Old Testament is teaching to us. The people of God never be able to overcome their sin and idolatry. That's the proof. Don't you see the same thing happen in your life? Whenever you fail, whenever you sin, you just make up your mind again, okay, I'm going to try harder this time, okay, so that I won't fall back to sin. Okay, I'm going to try harder. Okay, like previous time, I was a little, like that, but this time it will be different. But what you see again and again is that you fall back into the same idolatry and sin. Actually, if you try harder, it feels like it's so easier for me to going back to the sin again. It's not supposed to be like that, but it's totally opposite, right? So what's the solution? If you can never be free from the sin and idolatry, what's the solution? Have you ever thought about it? Do you actually know what God actually wants you to do? Would God actually want you to keep trying harder so that you can finally be free? Is that what God really wants from you? He knows exactly who we are. God knows that we can never fully obey God. So what God did was that He sent His Son as a solution, in the flesh. And Jesus died on the cross on our behalf. Think about it, on our behalf, on our sin. You guys already know about this, right? I'm sure you do. But what about this? He received the penalty that we deserved. What penalty? Have you thought about that? What penalty? Penalty for violating God's law. Penalty for violating God's law. When Jesus died, you know what happened? The law actually died with him. That's what happened. Law that God given to his people, it has died with him, with Jesus. So no obligation for you to follow the law anymore. Think about it. No more obligation. God is not telling you to keep the law as the Israelites used to do in the Old Testament period. He doesn't say that anymore. But if you still think that he does, right? Because you don't know the gospel. When Israelites were underage in Old Testament period, they used to be the underage, right? Just got out of the Egypt. And they were obligated to follow the law. But when Jesus actually came and died on the cross, the law was abolished. It's canceled. Think about it. It canceled. It doesn't exist anymore. Law doesn't exist anymore. And Israelites are no more bound to the law. They're not underage anymore. But Galatians, they were trying to go back. They tried to believe that, we are finally free in Jesus. We don't have to keep the law anymore. And then there were few Jewish people came to them and like, do you really think that God canceled the law all of a sudden? No, that's not. You still have obligation as a Jew to observe and keep the law. You planted a fear in them. So they start thinking, okay, maybe that's what you're supposed to do. You know? Think about it. If you already turned 18 and 21, you are not underage anymore, right? But you are still living in fear, right? Oh, I have to wake up at 7 in the morning. You know, I have to go to class. I mean, why do you have to have this fear? You are 21, you know? Oh, I have to turn the phone at 10 o'clock, you know? You still live in this fear. But you are not underage anymore. You know what that means? There's no one who can punish you. There is no one who can punish you, but you still believe that you will be punished. It will be so sad because you are still living in this fear. And you're free. You're free in Jesus, but you act like you're still living in this slavery. You're still living in this fear. So, what Paul is teaching is that do not go back to the slavery of keeping the law out of fear because you are free. The freedom finally came through Jesus, right? The one who died for your sin on the cross. Also, you should not go back to your old sin and slavery of sin. If you go back to your idolatry and sin again, you know what's going to happen? You will have this fear all over again. You know, fear of God's judgment. Okay, I'm sinning again. Okay, I thought I was free, but I'm supposed to be free. I'm supposed to be free from sin. I'm committing sin again. Okay, what's happening now? You know, you have this fear again. And what this fear will do is that this fear will bring you back to the slavery of the law. And you will all of this still think all this muscle memory will come back to you. Okay, there was time where I used to live in fear and I used to keep God's law as much as I can. You know, when you're going back to sin, that's what's going to happen. The old slavery of keeping the law will come back to you again. There's no more freedom. There's no more joy. You forget about God's freedom. God's freedom has given to you through His Son. You know, you can no longer believe that your sin has been forgiven. No, you can't believe that. You're still living in fear if you go back to your sin. So here's what I want to tell you. Stay away from sin and idolatry. But even if you fail, even if you commit a sin, what you're supposed to do, what you should do is that do not look at your sin. Do not look at your sin. And do not meditate your sin. How much you fail, how much you're disappointing God. Instead, what you should do is you should look at Jesus. You should look at Jesus. Meditate His death and meditate His love. Meditate God's love has displayed to you through His Son. Meditate. Instead of meditating your own sin. I mean, by meditating your sin, what's it going to do? You think it's going to set you free from sin? No, it brings you back to the old slavery. It's going to trap you. As you are meditating God's love, the fact that you are free in Jesus Christ, what will happen is that you will be able to rejoice and sing. You know when? When you are committing a sin. When you are committing a sin, instead of looking at your sin and you are meditating and looking at Jesus Christ on the cross, the freedom, there's finally freedom came to you. You will sing when you commit a sin. You will sing. Because Jesus has set you free from the law, from the penalty, from God's judgment. So do not go back. You are no longer slave to the law. I'll tell you this again. You are no longer bound to the law. Do not believe that. That's a lie. You are a child of God. And once you're a child of God, you will always be a child of God. 오늘 본문에서 바울은 예수를 믿고 다시 율법으로 돌아가려고 하는 갈라디아 사람들에게 그들의 행하는 것이 마치 어린아이의 때로 돌아가는 것과 같다고 전하는 것을 보게 됩니다. 우리가 알다시피 어린아이는 이 종과 다름이 없죠. 자유가 없습니다. 크면은 자유가 있게 되지만 어린아이일 때는 자유가 없죠. 오늘 말씀처럼 후견인과 청지기 아래에서 지내야 하기 때문입니다. 이스라엘 민족이 출애굽 후에 가나안 땅으로 들어가서 살게 됐을 때 그들의 상태는 영적 아이들과 같았습니다. 왜냐하면은 그들은 출애굽 전에 애굽 땅에서 430년 동안 그들이 애굽 사람들이 숭배하던 우상들을 그들도 같이 숭배하며 살았기 때문이죠. 여러분, 출애굽하고 나서 이스라엘 민족들이 모세가 내려오지 않자 갑자기 금송아지를 만들어서 갑자기 날뛰기 시작하면서 예배를 드리죠. 속된 말로 그것이 그 사람들이 갑자기 돌아서 그렇게 한 게 아닙니다. 갑자기 우연으로 이런 일이 일어난 게 아닙니다. 그것은 아주 자연스러운 것이었습니다. 왜냐하면은 애굽에서 배우고 보고 행하던 그대로 우상으로 돌아간 것밖에 없었기 때문이죠. 그들은 40년 광야 후에 가나안 땅에 정착했지만 그들은 두 가지 문제에 직면하게 됩니다. 첫째로는 40년 동안 광야에서 훈련을 받았지만은 다시 우상을 예배하는 그 이방인들 가운데 그들은 거해야만 했습니다. 유혹과 죄가 없는 하나님만 계시는 그곳이 아니라 유혹이 넘쳐나는 우상이 사방에서 넘쳐나는 그 정 가운데 그들은 거해야 했던 사실이죠. 둘째로는 죄와 절대로 함께 거하실 수 없는 그 거룩하신 하나님 가운데 그들은 거해야만 했습니다. 그래서 계속해서 죄를 짓게 되고 우상으로 빠지게 될 때 무슨 일이 일어날까요? 하나님, 그 거룩한 하나님은 그들을 심판할 수밖에 없으신 거죠. 이 두 가지 문제를 해결하시기 위해서 하나님께서는 이스라엘 민족에게 율법을 주셨습니다. 그들에게 자유를 주게 될 때 분명 다시 우상으로 빠지고 죄로 돌아갈 것을 아셨기 때문에 그들의 자유를 제어하면서 정욕과 욕심과 우상 숭배에서 그들을 보호하기 위해서 하나님이 율법을 그들에게 주신 거죠. 이것을 따르게 되면 너희가 이것을 쫓아서 따르게 되면은 이것이 너희를 우상과 죄로부터 보호해 줄 거고 너희를 온전히 나를 예배하는 나의 그 관계 안에 머물게 할 것이라고 하나님의 계획은 그것이었습니다. 하지만 그 후에 이스라엘 민족이 계속 우상 숭배로 돌아가게 되자 이스라엘 민족을 하나님께서는 심판하시고 그 언약을 폐하셨죠. 바벨론 포로에서 돌아온 후에도 그 어려운 세월과 고난을 겪은 후에도 그들은 변하지 않았습니다. 돌아와서 다시 우상 숭배와 죄로 돌아가게 된 거죠. 자신의 노력으로는 절대 하나님 앞에서 거룩한 삶과 순종의 삶을 살 수 없는 백성들을 하나님은 아셨고 그 백성들을 위해서 하나님은 예수님을 보내셨습니다. 그리고 예수님이 십자가에 죽으셨을 때 우리의 죄를 사하셨을 뿐만이 아니라 그 죽음으로 인해서 무엇이 이루어졌냐 하면은 율법이 그와 함께 죽게 되었다는 사실입니다. 구약에 주었던 너희가 이걸 목숨같이 지키라고 말씀했던 그 율법이 그리스도가 죽었을 때 같이 죽게 되었다는 거죠. 죄와 율법의 그 형벌이 만약에 죽음이라면은 여러분 죽음이라면 하나님 앞에서 죄를 짓고 율법을 지키지 않았을 때 그 형벌이 죽음이라면은 예수님이 죽으심을 당하시게 됐을 때 그 율법은 더 이상 효력을 잃게 됩니다. 그리스도 안에 거할 때 우리가 죄를 지어도 그리스도가 그 형벌을 받게 되셨기 때문에 더 이상 우리에게 형벌이 남아있지 않게 되는 거죠. 때문에 그리스도가 죽으셨을 때 우리는 더 이상 율법을 지켜야 하는 그 의무와 하나님 앞에서 그 두려움에서 우리는 벗어나게 되었습니다. 안타깝게도 우리는 이 사실을 잊고 지냅니다. 그리스도가 오심으로 우리는 더 이상 구약의 이스라엘 백성처럼 어린아이처럼 율법을 지켜야 하는 그 의무와 그 가운데서 더 이상 머물러 있지 않습니다. 하지만 마치 우리가 아직도 구약을 읽을 때 그것을 지켜야 하는 게 의무인 것처럼 우리는 두려운 마음으로 그 구약을 읽게 되죠. 그 사실을 우리는 어려워합니다. 우리가 자유하게 된 사실을 믿기가 어려워되죠. 여러분 왜 그런지 아시나요? 왜냐하면은 우리는 다시 죄를 지을 수밖에 없기 때문입니다. 죄를 다시 짓게 될 때 우리 안에 두려움이 임합니다. 두려움이 임하면 다시 율법을 지켜야 하는 그저 그 예전 그 기억과 그 자세로 우리는 다시 돌아가게 됩니다. 죄와 내 죄책감을 씻어내기 위해서 무엇이라도 해야 되는 그 상태로 돌아가게 되는 거죠. 여러분이 어렸을 때 배웠던 죄와 끝까지 싸워야만 하는 그것이 전부라고 배웠던 그 기억으로 다시 돌아가게 되는 것입니다. 여러분, 부모가 복음을 깨닫지 못한다면은 우리 아이들을 어쩌면 무의식적으로 율법적인 삶을 그들에게 강요를 할 수가 있습니다. 죄를 지으면 안 된다고 하지만 죄를 해결해 주신 예수 그리스도에서 할 수가 없는 거죠. 또 아이가 잘못할 때 그를 용서하고 잘못하는 가운데서 그를 사랑하고 용서를 할 수가 없습니다. 그들이 해야 되는 것은 그들이 잘못을 깨닫고 죄를 안 짓는 것이 그들이 해야 되는 것이라고 생각을 하는 거죠. 제가 어떤 미국 목사님의 설교에서 이런 말을 들은 적이 있습니다. 부모가 아이를 한 번 혼낼 때 5번 칭찬해야 좋았다고 합니다. 한 번 혼낼 때 그 후에 5번을 칭찬해 줘야 된다고 얘기를 합니다. 왜냐하면은 그러지 못할 때 그 상처가 그 아이의 뼛속 깊은 곳에 남을 수밖에 없기 때문이라고 저는 들은 적이 있습니다. 부모가 아이를 혼내는 것은 필요합니다. 왜냐하면 그를 바로 잡아주고 또 위험에서 그를 지켜줘야 하기 때문이죠. 또 죄에서 또 하나님을 경외하는 것에 대해서 분명 가르쳐야만 합니다. 그것을 가르치고 그를 훈육하지 않으면은 그러면 아이는 위험에 빠질 뿐만이 아니라 죄와 하나님을 두려워하지 않는 사람으로 성장하게 됩니다. 하지만 아이들을 혼낼 때 부모님이 그 자녀를 사랑한다는 것을 충분히 5번씩은 표현해 주셔야만 합니다. 그렇지 않으면 그 아이는 상처만 남은 아이로 자라나게 될 것입니다. 여러분, 제가 뉴스를 보면서 그리고 제가 또 어렸을 때 이렇게 친구들을 보면서 내 자신을 보면서 느낀 거는 아이들은 부모님을 통해서 하나님을 이해하게 됩니다. 부모님의 모습을 하나님의 모습에 대입시킬 수밖에 없게 되는 것을 저는 보았습니다. 나를 늘 혼내는 부모님만 보고 자랐다면은 나의 죄를 용서하시고 더 이상 그리스도 안에서 나를 정죄하지 않는다는 하나님이 정죄하지 않는다는 그 사실, 나를 끝까지 사랑하신다는 그 사실을 아이는 받아들일 수가 없습니다. 왜냐하면 그것을 부모님한테 경험한 적이 없기 때문이죠. 그리고 그 아이는 성인이 돼서도 자신의 잘못과 죄와 죄책감과 두려움에서 벗어나기 어렵게 될 것입니다. 여러분, 변하지 않는 아이들을 통해서 그들을 바라볼 때 내 자신을 볼 수 있어야만 합니다. 지금도 변하지 않는 죄에서 벗어나지 못하는 나를 그리스도 안에서 그의 죽음으로 율법 폐하여짐으로 나를 더 이상 정죄하지 않고 용서하시고 끝까지 사랑하시는 그 하나님을 우리는 발견해야만 합니다. 그때 우리 또한 아이들에게서 죄책감과 두려움이 아닌 그리스도 안에서의 자유함을 그들에게 가르칠 수 있을 것입니다. 그 축복이 저와 여러분에게 임하기를 축원합니다. 기도하시겠습니다.